Welcome back. March 31st, 2021. Yesterday, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez said this, quote, "It's not a border crisis. It's an imperialism crisis. It's a climate crisis. It's a trade crisis. And also it's a carceral crisis. But people don't want to have that conversation. They want to say, but what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you consciously is trying to involve a militaristic frame. And that's a problem because this is not a surge. These are children, and they are not insurgents, and we are not being invaded, which, by the way, is a white supremacist philosophy. The idea that if an other is coming into this population, that this is an invasion of who we are. Let's break this down. There's a lot here. First of all, imperialism crisis. You know what that means, right? Let's not let it slide or focus on the wrong part of her quote. Imperialism, which she calls this, has a specific meaning: the territorial, economic, geographic, and population takeover of another land or people. It has long been a fascination and a word used by Marxist movements throughout history, but also very heavily at the United Nations. Anyone who studies land or territorial conflict in foreign relations knows the United Nations' use and weaponization of that word, almost always in order to justify terrorism or revolution. Jean Kirkpatrick was onto this game early when she wrote, quote, "The struggle against imperialism pits progressive forces against any country perceived by Marxists or quasi-Marxists as an obstacle to the socialist camp. The struggle against racism asks the world's colored peoples, most of whose countries see themselves as part of the third world, to join a coalition for one more battle against white exploiters. It means replacing a colonialist or imperialist government with a progressive regime allied with the communists. It refers not to how government is organized, but to who governs," close quote. This would, of course, be why AOC also invoked white supremacy into her Jeremiad, and why she went to imperialism in the first place. What can it possibly mean? It means she thinks one of two things. Either the United States has plans to invade Mexico or spread its territory from Texas to New Mexico to Arizona to California southward to incursion into Mexico. If she thinks that, if she thinks there's a plan for any part of America or one of those four border states to do that, she's an absolute conspiracy theorist and nut. So the only other meaning it could possibly have for her to bring up imperialism as part of the border crisis is that she thinks that Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California are not the just and rightful property of the United States, and by being recognized as so, is just nothing more than an imperialist assault on Mexico or indigenous peoples. Not even the socialist president of Mexico believes this, but AOC does. Manuel Labrador Lopez never called America imperialist. No president of Mexico, to my knowledge, ever has. Oh yes, Stalin and Khrushchev and Brezhnev did. So too did Fidel Castro, just not Mexican presidents. That Arizona and California and Texas and New Mexico don't belong to us and belong to Mexico is the dream palace, however, of socialists and Marxists here, thinking Arizona and California and Texas and New Mexico actually, literally belong to Mexico. Guadalupe Hidalgo and Gadsden mean, obviously, nothing to AOC. But Karl Marx and revolutionary ideology does mean a lot to her. Ignore her language at your peril. Dismiss it at the expense of all American international law and history. I don't know why it's a climate or trade crisis, as she says, so I'm going to leave those charges alone, as I don't think they actually mean much more than the ever-increasing cascade of nouns leftists find to throw into the class action lawsuit against the United States and the West. Maybe I'm inventing a phrase here, with good entendres, no less. The leftist class action lawsuit against the United States and the West. Let's write that down, Bill. Maybe that'd be a good book title. But that, in any event, is all I attribute to throwing the words climate and trade into this crisis. It helps with the poetic meter of her diatribe, but not much more. As far as her berating the use of the word surge, where she said anyone who's using the term surge around you consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame, and that's a problem because this is not a surge. These are children and they are not insurgents and we are not being invaded. She may just have the wrong defendant in the wrong court with the wrong jury here. The first time I heard the word surge in context of our border was from Joe Biden, speaking in 2019 at a Democratic presidential primary debate. There he said, quote, "I would in fact make sure that we immediately have a surge to the border. All those people seeking asylum, they deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We are a nation that says if you want to flee and you are fleeing oppression, you should come." Close quote. He called it a surge. He called on them to surge. Those seeking to enter here when he is president should surge here. That was the plain meaning of what he said. And that is what he said. And that is what they did. Sorry to use the word Biden used, but you can't complain about a use of the word that your own team gave us and tells us they support, especially when you approve of the behavior involved. I'm not wedded to the word surge. I don't care that much about it, but it's your word. I'm happy to find another one. But stop with the linguistic lessons because you're just factually wrong. When you tell us those who crossing into the United States, quote, are not insurgents and we are not being invaded, close quote, you do not know that. You cannot possibly know that. When drug dealers set up shop in a neighborhood, it would not be abnormal to hear longtime residents of that neighborhood or peaceful residents of that neighborhood say they are being invaded by drug dealers or that their neighborhood is. Now, what say you? Not about a neighborhood and a drug dealer, but a country and several multi-billion-dollar valued drug cartels. What about those who want to exploit child sex and prostitution? Is that invasive? What are the large populations who herald from Middle Eastern countries who are crossing in, like the 11 Iranians captured at the border last month? You so sure all of this is just beneficence and normal international travel? But if you do, you really show your idiocy. You say the notion of invasion is, quote, by the way, a white supremacist philosophy. The idea that if an other is coming in the population, that this is an invasion of who we are, close quote. The word invasion is not a white supremacist philosophy. It just simply is not. When Ghana complained of being invaded by Nigeria, where was the white supremacist element? When Uganda complained of being invaded by Tanzania, where was the white supremacist element? When Iraq invaded Kuwait, where was the white supremacist element? When Iraq invaded Iran, where was the white supremacist element? When Hong Kong and Taiwan complain of fear of Chinese incursion or invasion, where's the white supremacist element? There are an awful lot of stories of invasion in the Bible, which we are told does not reflect the color of white people in it. So I ask, where is the white supremacist element in all the invasion stories in the Bible? The truth is there are territorial disputes throughout every single continent, and there have been since the beginning of time, and most of them were not among or between white populations. Not in Asia, not in Africa, not in the Middle East, and not in Central and South America, or among and between the indigenous. None of those people are white, and those incursions and invasions throughout their histories far outpace any count of invasions among and between white populations in Europe, as if it really matters but you're the one telling us this. Finally, the worst thing of all that AOC said here was, quote, the idea that if another is coming into the population, this is an invasion of who we are, close quote. First, where does Alexandria Ocasio Cortez think most of our legal immigrants come from? And who is the other that she's talking about? Those not from Europe, I suppose. But what is the right number of legal immigrants we should be bringing into this country every year that she says is not enough? Does 1 million sound reasonable? In a pandemic and a down economy, does 1 million legal immigrants a year from other countries sound reasonable? I think it's high, but that is our number, 1 million a year. About the same number all of Europe has immigrating legally to it. In other words, Europe, a continent of 50 countries, has the same legal number of immigrants that the United States takes in every year. And where do the bulk of our immigrants come from here in America? Do they come from Europe? No, they do not. They come from China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines, in that order. That's the bulk of our immigration. So who is this other she's talking about? She's inventing it and creating a straw man. Who ever here called any legal immigrants invaders? Nobody, so far as I know. But that phrase, quote, it's an invasion of who we are, close quote. What a slander and terrible understanding of our country. Who does she think we are, and who does she think we are? Who is the other? If someone immigrates to a minority-majority city, say Washington, D.C., is AOC of the opinion that that's not who we are? What's this who we are business? We think immigrants from Mexico or elsewhere change or invade who we are? Who are we? We aren't the woman who carjacked an Uber driver last weekend. We are much more like Muhammad Anwar, the man they killed. That's who we are. We are so many people, like Ayan Hirsi Ali or Mohammed Jasser, Zudi's dad. That's who we are. We are people who never until your team told us we had to looked at race as something determinative of anything. In fact, we want it to be the least determinative thing of all. And yet you think we think otherwise while you're the one talking otherwise all the time, bringing race up all the time. Even when we say we don't see race, you make us say we do because we must, according to you. I give you the high school in Loudoun County last week, one of the wealthiest counties in America. Quoting from Fox News, taken from a lecture at a Loudoun County public school in Ashburn, Virginia, and posted on YouTube, there shows a slide with two girls, one a red-headed white girl, the other a black girl, standing back to back with the caption, "What is race?" The teacher asks students what they see in the picture. An unidentified student says he sees just two people chilling. Right, just two people. Nothing more to that picture, the teacher asks. Not really, just two people chilling, the student reiterates. The teacher says, I don't believe that you believe that. I don't believe that you look at this as just two people. The student replies, it truly is just two people though, isn't it? Their back and forth continues, with the teacher calling the student intentionally coy about what he should be seeing. Eventually, the student asks the teacher if he is goading him into saying that there are two different races in the picture. Yes, I am trying to get you to say that, the teacher says. The student asks then, well, at the end of the day, wouldn't that just be feeding into the problem of looking at race instead of just acknowledging them as two normal people? Make that child the president of the world. The teacher had a response. No, it's not, because you can't not look at it. You can't look at the people and not acknowledge that there are racial differences, the teacher says. In a Facebook post obtained by the Daily Wire, school board member Beth Bartz told parents that the video is from an excerpt of a high school class discussion in, quote, dual enrollment college level English, where students are exposed to different literacy theories as a way of critiquing different pieces of literature, literature. Critical race theory was an example of a theory that can be applied, she wrote. Aren't you glad high schools are showing pictures of two girls and asking their students to identify what they see? A lot of discussion goes on about AOC and whether she's actually smart or not. Whatever your view, at least we can agree she got more than a passing grade in her effort of understanding dual enrollment, college-level English course critical race theory. Boy, we're teaching a lot of rot. In 1914, John Alexander Smith, a professor of moral philosophy at Oxford, addressed his students as follows: "Gentlemen, you are now about to embark on a course of studies that will form a noble adventure. Let me make this clear to you. Nothing that you will learn in the course of your studies will be of the slightest possible of use to you in the afterlife, save only this, that if you work hard and intelligently, you should be able to detect when a man is talking rot. And that, in my view, is the main, if not the sole purpose of education." I'm Seth Leibson.